You're somebody who's worked in various roles in major league organizations. My listener, they're parents of players who have aspirations of being big league players. Their kids are probably anywhere from, let's say it's 10 to 18 years old. Is there an experience that you had out of the draft, whether it was as a GM or somewhere in between, that really sat with you? It's the first one that comes to mind, that experience.
One of the things that has really evolved in the game is just how sophisticated we evaluate talent now. It used to be very subjective. Scouts would sit down. We literally would have a whiteboard and 500 magnets. One of them would have your son's name on it. And we'd systematically go through all the right-hand pitchers, all the left-hand pitchers, then all the catchers, and so on and so forth. Now we're using a lot of models and data-driven systems to provide ourselves with the baseline of it. Here's how we would evaluate the top 300. What are the other little things they're doing? Are they the types of people who continue to go above and beyond? It's more than just running out the infield pop-up. What is your son doing when nobody's looking?
So I'm joined today by someone who I've known for quite a long time. I'm aging myself. You've been in the business a little bit longer than I have. So Thad, you were the general manager, I guess, most recently, the Minnesota Twins from, I think it was 17 to 2024. Prior to that, you were an assistant GM with the Texas Rangers, starting in like the mid 2000s, right?
That's right. Yeah, 2006.
2006. And then before that, the Rockies, I think the Dodgers at one point. So you've worn many hats.
Yeah, I started with the Dodgers. It was an academic internship back when you were allowed to abuse students and not pay them. I got academic credit.
I was one of those interns that got abused, so I can empathize.
I think that's the tie that binds all of us together, is the love of baseball and the being abused as an intern at some point in our careers.
Yeah, it certainly makes you appreciate it as you work your way up. You've cut your teeth doing a little bit of everything. So that's great.
Well, and on the baseball side, there are two sides to the business. There's the business side, and then there's the baseball side. All of us aspired to work in baseball, but the reality is my internship was on the business side. I was working for the Dodgers while going to grad school at UCLA, but I was working their business development side. And I was thinking at the beginning that I would just have to do that for 5-6 years, hopefully align myself with somebody on the baseball side who would be charitable enough to bring me over. But in practice, what happened was once I graduated from graduate school, I applied to the Colorado Rockies for a marketing job that I was grossly overqualified for. They rejected me. And 10 days later, they hired me for a baseball job I was probably significantly underqualified for. So I jump-started the career, got right into baseball kind of haphazardly.
What was the baseball job that they hired you for?
So at that time, and this, once again, this won't be the first time I date myself in this conversation, but we literally had like 12 to 14 people who worked full-time in the front office at that time. So I was hired to be an advanced scout. So there were two of us. One of us worked on the pitching side. One of us worked on the offensive side. And so you basically are either preparing for the opposition on one side or the other. And so I was working with a gentleman by the name of Paul Herfurth. He was responsible for scouting our team. I was responsible for scouting the opposing team. Really, as a glorified intern, I was sitting down with the pitching coach at the time, who was Bob Apodaca. The hitting coach was Clint Hurdle, and we were devising strategies of how to beat the opposition. And at that time, the data didn't come formatted. We had to create it ourselves. So I was watching VHS tapes, if any of your listeners are old enough to remember what those things were. And the average game in Colorado at that time was 4 hours. And so it would take me about 6 hours to clip every pitch from a game, map it to video, and then create a stat package that came out of that. And if, God forbid, anything failed along the way, I'd have to start all over. So, it was taking me on average about 6 hours to prepare every single game. You do 5 games at a time to prepare for the opposition. And then I was sitting down at a very, inexperienced time in my career with guys who were veteran big league pitching and hitting coaches. And then we would sit down with the hitters and pitchers and try to explain to them how we could beat the opposition.
What a great learning, honestly, if I think about how to start out in a career to eventually have aspirations of being a general manager, the fact that you got to spend time really wrestling with some of those hard decisions that you're seeing the coaching staff need to make, I mean, that's gold. Being that you're somebody who's worked in various roles in major league organizations, talk to me a little bit about, because my listener, they're parents of players who have aspirations of being big league players. their kids are probably anywhere from, let's say it's 10 to 18 years old. I want to talk a little bit about the draft. Is there an experience that you had out of the draft, whether it was as a GM or somewhere in between, that really sat with you and you kind of still, it's the first one that comes to mind, that experience?
I want to talk a little bit about the process for the families to understand what's going on the other side in terms of the scrutiny of the players, your sons. One of the things that has really evolved in the game, Matt, for over the last 10 years is just how sophisticated we evaluate talent now. It used to be very subjective, where a bunch of scouts would sit down. We literally would have a whiteboard and about 500 magnets. One of them would have your son's name on it. And we'd systematically go through all the right-hand pitchers in the draft, all the left-hand pitchers, then all the catchers, and so on and so forth. And then we would start blending those lists together. Well, now we're using a lot of models and data-driven systems to at least provide ourselves with the baseline of here's how we would evaluate the top 300. But I want to just share a few things that go into those evaluations that maybe are beyond just what you see on the field. So, of course, we're taking into consideration talent and how hard your son can throw, or how hard he can hit a ball, or how fast he can run. But I think where we've now really shifted the talent evaluation standpoint from the scouting is what are the other little things they're doing? So I think where I have found the most success in terms of drafting players is what is your son doing when nobody's looking? Are they the types of people who continue to go above and beyond? Like, we ascribe a lot of character values to that. And don't get me wrong, I don't think any team is saying whatever your son presents as being a 17-year-old or even a 21-year-old in college is what he will be in perpetuity. But there are some underlying markers. It's more than just running out the infield pop-up. I think it's more of what are they doing when no one's looking? Is the player the type of person who would rather go 0 for 3 and win, or go 2 for 3 and lose? Are they helping their teammates around them? And just one analogy that I always looked at as an executive in baseball is, whether it's the trading deadline, whether it's the offseason, I could always buy muscle. And muscle showed up in the form of, let's say it's 90 RBI, or it's 30 home runs, or it's 180 innings pitched for a pitcher. I can get on the phone with Matt and I can negotiate a deal for one of his free agents, provided I'm willing to meet his asking price. Or I can negotiate with a general manager and I could pay the prospect price to acquire a player in trade. The players who I think were the separators were the guys who were the heart and soul players. These are the guys that, no matter what, teams weren't giving up. At times they were the best players on the team, but the values that they had, and this is what we hunted in the draft, is they were force multipliers. These were guys who genuinely had the ability to elevate the level of play of the players around them, set a standard of excellence, but then they also had the genuine care to invest in doing that on a daily basis. These are the guys that always left you scratching your head a little bit, I wonder why this player has had a longer career than most. I hearken back to when the Cubs finally broke their curse and won the World Series, and Chris Bryant and Javi Baez and Ben Zobrist and all these guys were interviewed, and Anthony Rizzo, and the name they always brought up was Ross. David Ross was the guy who they thought was a leader on that team. For a lot of us, we were scratching our head and wondering, how is David Ross even still active on this team? He's kind of a little bit past his prime, but each of them said that this was the guy that was the glue that kept us all together. He was the guy who elevated the level of play of everyone in the clubhouse. So I think there's guys in there that we're hunting for in the draft. Talent is something we can enhance once you get into the player development system. But when you walk in the door, and Matt, I'm guessing these are the exact types of guys you want to represent.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you want to represent the most talent you can. These are the guys that we seek in, because every team is looking for those guys who, whether they want to win more than everyone else or they just don't like losing more than everybody else, they're the guys that set the tone in the clubhouse. And in a sport where there's a lot of individual performance, these are the guys that bring the whole teams together. So that's the one thing I would just like to share with the listeners coming out of the draft is we're watching those things. We would send our scouts to watch the players play their secondary sport. So let's say they're baseball players, but also they run track or they play football or they play basketball. We're watching those games too to see maybe they're the stars in baseball, but maybe they're a secondary player in their second sport. One thing I think we did very well in Texas, we adopted in Minnesota too, is when that player is in the farm system, clearly a great prospect, came out of high school, was either a leadoff hitter, 3-hole hitter, 4-hole hitter. He was a premium player on the team. We would tell him, hey, listen, you're not playing tonight. There's no chance you're getting in the game, but figure out a way to help us win this game. And then we would try to guide him through that. Is it picking up a tell from the opposing team's pitcher? Is it going to the kid who is 0 for 2, who probably is going to hit again in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning, and picking him up and getting him focused and back in the game? But it's those types of qualities, I think, that then extend your career, give you additional consideration. Once again, talent is awesome. If you're the most talented player on the team, you're going to get extra opportunities. But if you're not the most talented player, most aren't when you get into professional baseball, the next way to extend your career is being one of these force multipliers that elevates everybody around you.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of the parents, when they hear that, they, probably think, if I had to expect having conversations with these parents, they think, okay, so we need to show that this is what we are. Like, they start with that premise. And where I would tell people to pause is like, no. We're not trying to express something that doesn't exist. We first need to address, does this exist? And if it does, then yes, make sure that this player is aware that these are important things as well. But if it doesn't exist, well, how do we build those things? How do we create a player who, let's just say, is that guy who thinks, I'd rather get the team win than go 4 for 4? Funny enough, so Zach Cole's one of my clients who was fortunate to get called up to the big leagues last year with Houston. I just saw him 2 days ago, and we had this exact conversation. And he said to me, he goes, Matt, there was a point in the season last year where he went 4 for 4 and they lost. And he was so bummed out. And then the next day they ended up winning and he was 0 for 4, I think, with like 3 strikeouts. And he goes, you just get to a place in your career where you realize, all I ever want to do is I just want to win.
Matt, just to be clear, when I talk about some of these leadership qualities, like, we're not holding a kid to the standard of being the guy who can stand up in front of the room and give a rousing 5-minute speech before the last game of a playoff series. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. Like, that's a great quality, but those are few and far between. Like, a lot of what we're talking about is guys who do things behind the scenes, guys who lead by example. So there's space for the most introverted and the most extroverted person to contribute in this space and be evaluated on this front. So I think it's aligning yourself with a coach or a mentor, whether that's a parent, it could be a representative, it could be a friend, who identifies what is your skill set, put you in the best position to succeed, give you the resources to do it, and then climb the ladder together with you. I think that's what we're trying to accomplish as best we can when we talk about developing leadership. It's not all about the guy who gives the rah-rah speech. Like, there's probably only 1 or 2 of those guys on your team. And I'll just come up with an example, and you probably know this guy very well. Joe Mauer was with the Twins we overlapped for 2 years, just an absolute A+ human being. But he wasn't the guy who necessarily felt super comfortable giving those rousing speeches. But what he did was led by exceptional example every day. And he had a tradition that he did after every game that we won. He gave out a game ball. And what he did was he had an incredible recall for everything that happened during the game that contributed to us winning. And he would talk about it. So he would talk about the fact that Eddie Rosario hit a 3-run homer, in that Jose Barrios threw 6 innings, and that was awesome. But the game ball went to Tyler Duffy. And Tyler Duffy was the guy who threw 4 outs when he was pitching on 3 consecutive days of pitching. He was kind of on fumes, but he picked us up. He got us to the back end of the bullpen. And so what he did remarkably was he acknowledged the guys that did the heavy lifting, but then he made, at that time, there was a 25-man roster. Now there's a 26-man roster. He made the 25th man in the room feel like the 12th most important on the team.
So as you guys evaluate these kids, talk to me a little bit about high school versus college. I mean, all the numbers would show you if you were to look at them. Yeah, let's just say a guy who signs for $1 million out of high school versus a guy who signs for $1 million out of college. There's a higher likelihood that the guy who signs out of college has a better chance of getting to the big leagues, right? Now, that can be a little misleading. The college guy's a little bit older. There's a little bit more assurance. But what do you think the value is for an organization for players out of college versus high school?
Some of the things we looked at, it's risk profiles. So we have enough data now to understand the players who are similarly talented in similar talent bands. How do they do? And you kind of break them into 4 groups. One is whether it's high school or college. And then 2 is it a pitcher or a position player? And I think there's a risk profile associated with each of them. So if you're evaluating, let's say, assuming that you have 4 players, 1 in each of those categories, they're all considered to have the same talent level. And I'm just speaking candidly here. I wish this wasn't the case, but the high school pitcher is the most risky. The college position player is the least risky. And then the college pitcher and the high school position player are kind of on a similar footing. And so if all things are equal, you're probably going to take the college position player early, because the other thing that I think we've learned through the draft is it's much easier to find pitching later in the draft than it is impact position players. I think part of that is because we all have pitching labs now. There's the off-season pitching programs that are so good, at Driveline and places like that, that there's a real chance for significant gains made by pitchers. You don't see quite as the same level of significant gains on the position player side. So if you want to hunt position players, usually you're getting those guys, the impact position players, at the top of the draft. So you see a lot of teams that are just taking position players almost regardless in the first round. What that allows for is in the second half of the first round, there's some exceptional deals you can get on pitchers, because you may be picking the second, third, fourth best pitcher on the board, whereas your other choice is the 14th best position player. So I think the teams that are picking the second half of the first round are getting some exceptional pitching there. But I know in Minnesota, we made tremendous strides by picking pitching like rounds 5 through 10. And we had supreme confidence in our ability to be able to add velocity. We had the ability to add a pitch to the repertoire. There's just no equivalent of that on the position player side, where you're adding something that can so dramatically change the value of a player. So maybe in summation, Matt, to answer your question, I think in general, we're probably hunting position players earlier in the draft than pitching. We're all a little bit more cautious about the high school pitcher. And we are then, recognizing that there's a finite amount of elite college pitching, and there's a lot of opportunities later in the draft to take high school and college pitching and know that you're going to see a lot of gains within their talent profiles.
Yeah, and I think from an outsider's perspective, just looking at drafts from one year to the next, I think a lot of people would get hung up on trends. Oh, well, it looks like this organization does this every single year. And I think it's something to look at, but it's also extremely misleading if you're not careful. Because obviously certain drafts are heavy in certain positions, heavy in college versus high school, et cetera. But from an organization's perspective, how would you guys incorporate what you already have in your system to determine what you're going to take at the top of the draft?
I think it's really prevalent in the other sports. You see in the NBA, the NFL, even the NHL, I'm less familiar there, but guys are coming right out of the draft and impacting those leagues. That does not happen in baseball. So I think the vast majority, if not all teams at this point, are taking the best available talent when their spot comes up. Because in practice, the best college players are still probably taking 1 to 3 years to get to the big leagues. Trey Savage is a great example of a guy who almost came directly. Anaheim has been taking a lot of their guys from right out of the draft pool right into the big leagues. That seems to be a priority for them to get guys to the big leagues as quickly as possible. But by and large, it's a 1 to 3 year process for the best college players. It's a 3 to 4 year process for the best high school players. So for us to prognosticate what we're going to need 2 to 4 years down the road is really challenging to do. So it's really difficult to make it to the big leagues. It's extremely difficult to make it as a premium position player, which is to say, most of us are building up the middle of our teams. So we're prioritizing catching, shortstops, center fielders, and starting pitching. Like that's where you start. And part of the reason for that is if a shortstop gets a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, you can move him to second base or you can move him to third base. If you have a center fielder who gets a little bit slower because he gets stronger and more powerful, you can move him to left field and right field. Once you move a guy from shortstop to second base, the next move is to third base. The next move is to first base. So there's opportunities if they become less versatile defensively, they still have positions to go to. Whereas if you're drafting a guy who's a first baseman and he had all, kind of downgrades defensively, he's really becoming a DH at that point. Maybe he could play right field or left field, but there's not a lot of options to go from there. So you want the most athletic defender and versatile defender you can, because that gives you much more of a runway in the event that he can't play his featured position. There's still ways he can still contribute defensively. When you start drafting, third baseman, maybe they can go to first base, maybe they can go to corner outfield, but then the next move is probably DH. And so that's where I think we are prioritizing those up the middle guys as another means of separation in the draft. And that's why you see oftentimes in the first round of the draft, a lot of shortstops go pretty quickly. And then you start seeing some other positions come off the board.
talk a little bit, because you mentioned this, that high school pitching and really high school right-handed pitching, I think too, is a tremendous risk. I've oftentimes told families, as you go into the draft, I know there's this assumption like, oh, well, if I'm a first rounder, there's 30 teams for me to go to in the first round. It's like, well, wait a second. Some of those teams are going to go college if you're a high school kid, right? So let's just say half are going to go college. All right, well, that's 15 teams then you have. And then some of those 15 teams are going to go position player and not pitcher. So now we're talking about 7 or 8 teams in the first round that actually may take you. Now, where do you stack up with those 7 or 8 teams? So I guess talk a little bit about that high school pitcher and why that is so risky.
So I guess I would just say this, like, there's kind of a collision course in our sport right now where these two things are true. The harder you throw, the tougher it is to hit you as a pitcher. The harder you throw, the more likely you are to get hurt. So those two things are happening simultaneously. So to be a high school pitcher who attracts first round attention, you probably have well above average velocity. So you're throwing in the mid to potentially upper 90s. And if you're doing that as a very young man, when you haven't maybe fully developed physically, I think the risk of injury is heightened. And that's just unfortunately a reality. So it's not to downgrade their talent or potentially their ability to be an impact big leaguer. I think it's just an awareness that there may be more likely that player is to get hurt than his college counterpart who's already developed a little bit more physically. We referenced earlier, we've had a lot of success, or we had a lot of success when I was with Minnesota, of drafting pitchers who were throwing in the upper 80s and then putting 4 to 5 miles an hour, sometimes 6 to 7 on their arms. And all of a sudden now they're throwing harder. The kid who's throwing that hard that early, I think it's unfortunately just a higher health risk. In baseball, the evaluation process, there's so many of these showcase events, which are great. I think we're partners with so many of these groups, and you reference Perfect Game as one of the best in the country. But in those formats, these kids are throwing, oftentimes 1 or 2 inning at a time, and they get the most attention if they light up the radar gun. So when we're evaluating those kids, we can speak very clearly to their ability to overpower hitters in short stints. But what we don't get a sense for is, because they're so far ahead of the hitters in some cases, how do they go a second time through the order? How do they set guys up? How do they think through scenarios from a pitching perspective? We gain a lot of insights into that if they go to college and they're facing players who are a little bit more at their level. I think that's a secondary benefit of watching kids who are pitchers go through college, is you get a sense of how good of a pitcher they're going to be. I think coming out of high school, we have a better sense of how good of a thrower they are. Through the college process, I think we gain insights as to how good of a pitcher they're going to be.
On that note, I've grown to really respect Wes Johnson, who obviously because he was the pitching coach for the Minnesota Twins at one point. How do major league organizations view kind of the coaching staff at the college level? Like, how much homework are you guys either doing on that, or how much value do you place on a player going to an LSU or a Georgia or an Arkansas or schools like this who have a track record for doing a good job?
You were talking about how you profile each team, and sometimes teams have tendencies. I think of the Seattle Mariners have done an excellent job of drafting pitching in the first round when most of us are going position player, and they've developed those guys exceptionally well. I think the game of baseball is all about talent evaluation. I think we conventionally think of it as, okay, you see 3 shortstops playing in a workout. How do you rank them 1, 2, and 3? But I think in practice, like, part of my job was having a scouting report on you and all the agents, so that every conversation I had with you ideally was better than the last one. And similarly, I have a scouting report on all the GMs and assistant GMs, the guys who I didn't negotiate with, so that I could facilitate a better and more efficient conversation. But I think the same thing is going on in the college game. We're assessing each of these schools, and I think we know that some of them are really good at developing pitching, some are really good at developing position players, some of them are really good at developing catching, for argument's sake. The big leagues, it used to be like every team had their quote unquote way of doing things. There was the Texas Rangers way, the New York Yankees way, the Oakland Athletics way, and those were linked to the manager. And if you didn't, subscribe to that, you were going to get traded. You're out of that system. Now in the big leagues, every team that is successful tailors to get the best out of every player. There's no singular way of doing things. Like, we're in the business of facilitating you being the best version of yourself. I think college is a little bit behind in that regard. When you talk about some of the guys coming out of Tennessee or Georgia, as you reference, like maybe there's a specific way, but the most sophisticated guys, they're getting the most out of the talent because there's such, a turnover in the roster year over year with the transfer portal. They've got to be able to attract every type of talent, not just the talent that they feel comfortable coaching. So I think there's more cross collaboration in the sense that each of these programs is really doing a great job of getting the most out of their players. And then the last component of this, as you know, is so many of these guys are crossing over to the big leagues now. Tony Votto just was hired, longtime, exceptionally successful coach at University of Tennessee. He's had a few stops along the way. He's now the head coach, or, he's now what is called the manager. We call him the manager in the big leagues of the San Francisco Giants, having no big league experience. There's a lot of crossing going on right now between college coaching, professional coaching. So I think we have a heightened appreciation of what they're doing, but we're talking to these guys on a constant basis because we're getting better from having conversations with college coaching, understanding what they're doing to develop talent.
For the game of baseball as a whole to just continue to move in the right direction, we obviously need every level, whether that's the minor leagues, college, high school, to be really good at working with players, right? In a very smart way, in a very safe way. And so the more college coaches or high school coaches or travel ball organizations that are educated, that do things the right way, I think it's ultimately better for everybody. Because if you see a kid, let's just say, who's getting abused in high school because he's throwing way too much, he gets in a pro ball and then he has an arm injury, right? And then now you're stuck having to deal with, it wasn't anything that you guys necessarily did. It was really a byproduct of what he was doing from the age of 14 to 17, right? So I think on some level, there is incentive for everybody to really be aware of this and try to help out all of the different levels. So I love that you guys do communicate with those colleges. I also know that the colleges oftentimes can provide you guys a ton of information on the player. Getting that information is extremely valuable. So if you have these relationships, naturally, I would expect that you guys kind of lean on that to, help fill in the gaps, of any information that's lacking.
I think there's been an evolution in the relationship with a college coach. It used to be when we didn't have much data, it was talking to them about like, hey, can you give me a scouting report on this kid? Like, how hard does he hit it in practice? Like, what does his BP look like? And all those things. Then we all of a sudden got to a point where we had so much data that we didn't really rely on them for the breakdown of the talents. But we're now breaking down, what does it look like when we're not looking? Like, what is he like in your locker room? Is he adaptable? Is he somebody that you can coach up and he takes criticism? Is he a learner who you need to talk to, or you need to, show him video to be able to get him to maneuver? How long does it take him to make some of these transitions? Because the best players in the game's always adjusting to them. The ones who can adjust back are the ones who have longer careers. Like, do they demonstrate an ability to do that in college or in the high school game?
Yeah.
The best players have a lot of talent for sure. They also have to be available. They have to take care of themselves so that they can play as many games and contribute as much as they possibly can. And then if you hit the trifecta, they also are great human beings. And then you see the guys who maybe aren't the great human being. Now it detracts from the talent they contribute. And you don't want these guys to be detracting from it. And we see that across all sports where you have challenges, where players who are your star players are also your biggest problem. Like that's a real negative. When they're additive to your clubhouse and they're exceptional on the ball field, that's the star player that you want to pursue. Those are the guys, like the Austin Rileys of the world that you're signing to what you hope will be deals that span their entire career, because you know how positive they are both on and off the field. Most guys aren't able to go 3 for 4 every night. So are they able to contribute when they go 1 for 4 or 0 for 4 or have an 0 for 18? Are they still making contributions? If the answer to that is yes, those are the guys you want to lock up for their careers.
Where my mind goes with this, and I would assume you share in this ability now. We both got into the game. We obviously played in college. You went to Hannaford, which I do need to give a shout out to because I feel like they produce more MLB executives than maybe any other school, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be up there.
Considering how small the school is, it's been incredible, the pipeline, which has just been wonderful to be part of.
But so obviously we played college baseball. We get into this game and, we're watching a ton of baseball, right? And I would assume when you first got started, you're like, oh, that guy looks good. And you're seeing these things and you may say, oh man, I think this guy can be, he's got a chance to be really good. I remember there's a story. So Joey Votto, who was a client of ours, and there was another player, which I won't name, signed both of these players at the same time. Both were in low A with the Cincinnati Reds. And these players both at that point were just the most physical, the most gifted players. There's no world I could know which player was going to be the better player at that point. And then you see how their careers panned out. They both got to the big leagues, but Joey Votto goes on to be, the Joey Votto who signs for $225 million, who was a MVP winner. And then the other player, had a cup of coffee, but, kept going up and down. And now as I reflect back on that, Joey Votto, funny enough, was the guy who, when he stepped foot in the stadium, there was like a flip that switched. And this guy was like an absolute animal. And he was just so, it reminds me a little bit about like a racehorse who's got blinders on. Like he had one thing on his mind, and it was, how am I going to get better today? And so you now see that, and it's like, well, now it's no wonder that Joey Votto had that career that he had. This other player didn't possess that. Even if it was still only 15, 20 seconds of you watching a kid, you're paying attention to things that maybe come naturally to you now that you never possessed early. I share that because a lot of parents go to these travel ball events and they see these players and they're like, my son's better than that kid, right? Why is my kid not getting the credit or getting the opportunities to do all this other stuff? And the point I'm trying to make is the people in this business who get paid to evaluate, there's a way in which they do it. There's a lot of, and I'm not saying that the draft is perfect by any means, but there's a lot that goes into it that it's more than just the 15 or 20 second clip that you're going to see of the kid. You're not investing millions of dollars into a kid without a really decent amount of assurance that this kid actually is going to be worth that money.
To the listener, they may not realize this, but something MLB has implemented in the last 5 years is what, a kind of a version of an MLB Combine that happens before the draft. And I would tell you, the thing that we get the most out of that is not lining all the kids up at shortstop and seeing how they do, taking ground balls, not, clocking them running around the bases or how hard they could hit. It's the fact that we get to have an interview with the kid. And that is invaluable. And now that is factoring into all of our models. It's moving players up and down the board based upon our perception of, fundamentally, like when you talk about a guy like Joey Votto, it's like, how, this may sound naive to say this, but how much do they love the game of baseball? They're people who I've been around, I'm sure you can attest the same, who are massively talented, but they're kind of bummed that they didn't get drafted to be in the NBA, or they really were hockey fans growing up and they just happened to be playing baseball. Most of those guys don't realize their potential because they don't love the game. There's also a sense of like, we all want to win, but what are you prepared to do to win? The game doesn't necessarily reward hard triers and hard hopers. It rewards people who end up taking risks to be great. So as you sit here and you're a very good high school player, you're a very good college player, but your agent or your coach or your parents tell you, hey, there's this area of your game you need to work on. Are you prepared to do it before you have to, or after the game tells you you're not good enough anymore? And the kids who are doing it, kind of proactively, I think are the ones who excel, because you have to be willing to risk goodness to get to greatness, to excel at a game that is so challenging as baseball is, especially as you start moving through the minor leagues and you have designs of getting to the big league. So my guess is, and I don't know Joey Votto like you do, my guess is he hated losing more than most. He loved the game more than most. And he was constantly willing to take risks of, however good I am today, how can I become better tomorrow? And not just resting on goodness and aspiring to greatness, because those are the guys who extend their careers. Those are the guys who get the most out of their talent, because we could all cite guys who unfortunately were massively talented, didn't have the work ethic, didn't have the love of the game, didn't have that willingness to proactively try to get better today, to, in advance of that weakness getting exposed tomorrow. Once the weakness gets exposed, it's really tough to counteract that unless you're a step ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What's interesting about Joey is Joey treated baseball like an art form. Like he was an artist, right? He was treating baseball truly like, I need to perfect this craft. And on some level, you could hear that and think, oh, that also could be a bad thing. And on some level, maybe it could be a bad thing. But he had this balance with it that he was really fascinated about how good he could possibly be. And Joey was similar to the other guy that you were talking about, who really just wanted to, add value to other, like Joe Mauer. I think it was Joe that you were saying, like, he's not necessarily the guy that's going to be the rah-rah guy. He gets called up to the big leagues, and Ken Griffey Jr. is on his team. Like, Joey's not going to be the boisterous guy in the clubhouse telling people what to do. That was Kenny's job. That was, Adam Dunn's job. Those guys were the ones that were responsible for that. But Joey was somebody who he showed you how you should work, right? And he was going to be the first guy there and the last one to leave no matter what. And that is something that I think every player and every family should take from this is there's value that I place on it. There's value you as a general manager, you guys placed on it.
And Matt, one thing, if I may throw in there, like I think it's important too, the coaches value that. So talent is going to carry you further than anything. But if you've got a great work ethic and you're busting your tail, the coaches want to put you in positions to succeed. Now, it requires you to be part of that. Like there's a player plan for every single individual player that is co-authored by the players, I think, in the best setting. But fundamentally, we're trying to challenge you appropriately, but give you the best resources to excel. But then ideally, the coach is getting in the boat and rowing with you to try to achieve that accomplishment. And then when you collectively achieve the accomplishment, now here's the next goal and challenge we have for you. And here's the next set of resources. So if you're working astride with the coach and putting in the effort, there's nothing they won't do to try to help you succeed.
And I really want parents to hear this. Listening to what we're describing and what's valuable to organizations and what's valuable to coaches and agents or GMs. There's a lot of this as they look at their son. They may look at him and say, I don't know that he possesses these things that you're describing that you guys find value in. I'm not sure that he possesses that. At the end of the day, it is teachable still. Now, it doesn't mean, though, that mom or dad telling the player is going to ultimately get them to do the thing that they want them to do. Because we've all seen players with so much God-given talent. Mom and dad's been telling them this for years. Agents been telling them this for years, and they still don't do it. It takes them having to go through it their way, failing, and then realizing, okay, wait a minute. I don't want to not reach my goal. Now I'm willing to do the work, right? And so to any mom and dad listening, that may happen for your son before he gets drafted. It may not, though. It may be after he gets drafted. And there's, on some level, and maybe this is just meant to take some pressure off the parent. It's not a matter of, oh, you didn't deliver the information to your son in the right way. This is life. We're all people. We're all learning.
100%. And I think once again, just to really drive this point home, nobody is saying that a young man who's 17 years old or 20 years old is a finished product. Like they do not have to present the best self in that moment. Like, here's the relationship we're seeking. We're going to challenge you. We're going to give you every opportunity to excel based upon giving you elite resources. Your responsibility then is to do the best you can in that moment. And if you continue to do that, the flywheel will move forward. That doesn't mean succeeding necessarily, because success can be defined simply as, did they make the most of the opportunity here? It's not necessarily that he pitched an 8-inning shutout or that he went 3 for 4. It's, was he able to show progress in these moments given the challenge that was presented to them and the resources provided to them? We're looking for every reason for the kid to succeed. Some degree of drive has to come from within, and work ethic has to come from within. We'll constantly support, we'll constantly provide resources to excel, but it's going to be up to that player ultimately at some point to say, I'm going to dig my heels in today, and today's the day I get better.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of the Combine, and I've encouraged a lot of guys to go to the Combine, is it should really be from a place of, I know how good I am. I'm willing to go. I want to go because I want to show everybody that I deserve to get taken actually higher, even if I'm a first-round pick. Now, I recognize that doesn't mean 100% of the guys should go. But with all that being said, it is one of the reasons you mentioned the Combine earlier. I did want to touch on that because it goes into that mindset of like, you're not going to be able to hide yourself. Like this game is going to expose you at some point. And so I'd rather sharpen my sword early so that when I get the opportunity, like I'm already a better version of myself than I was a year ago, 5 years ago, whatever it is.
It's kind of the question is, what is our goal out of the draft? Do we view this as the biggest payday your son's ever going to have? Or do we think he's going to make it to the big leagues and there'll be more paydays down the road? And I understand it's a tough road to get to the big leagues. It's an even tougher road to be a significant earner in the big leagues. But if your goal is to get the most money out of the draft, then we should play this to accomplish that. And sometimes that means show up at the Combine because that will enhance my value. Sometimes it means don't show up at the Combine because that could hurt my value. But I would be more inclined to say, let's make sure we get your son into the place where he has the chance to be the best version of himself. where that's going to be is where they know him the best, right? And if there is some deficiency, like let's make sure that's made known at the front end. And then the responsibility then falls back on your lap, Matt, of like, okay, now let's map him to the places that has had the most success working with players with this profile. Because as much as we're scouting you, you're scouting us. And I'm sure you have like a list of, if I have a pitcher or if I have a position player or if I have a guy with maybe a little, makeup challenges or leadership challenges, these are the teams that have had the most success in my experience developing players like that. So now maybe I'm not hunting or positioning they have to get the highest dollar, but rather I'm trying to engineer so they get to one of these 4 to 6 teams, because I just know that's going to be a better place for them to realize their earning potential, which I hope to be in the big leagues, not just on draft night.
So I want to go into like value of a player a little bit out of the draft. Obviously, the money that a player signs for on some level is an investment by the organization into that player. How does that help the player as he is progressing through the minor leagues? And there's a guy, and I'm not going to name him, who comes to mind, a player who signed for a lot of money out of the draft, millions and millions of dollars, and his career quickly derailed. He was a high school kid, quickly derails. And, I think this was 4 or 5 years ago. He's still with that same organization, getting opportunity. And one would argue it's probably because he signed for multiple millions of dollars. If he signed for $100,000, he probably would have been released by now. How do you guys think about it from the front office's perspective when you have these kids that you're investing in? What does that represent for you, that money that you're giving them?
I think this was a little bit of a tough lesson to learn as an executive, because I was raised by wonderful parents who really engendered in me and my sister the notion that we should treat everyone the same and we should treat everyone very fairly. And I think what you witness and what you're referencing here, Matt, is that the reality is, I think in practice, when you're dealing with a high-end talent pool, you should treat everyone fairly for sure, but I'm not sure you should treat everyone the same. It's just not realistic. Like, you are going to give people with more talent more consideration. So the kids who are signing for higher dollar amounts, in some regards, and some model and some scouting report, were deemed to be the most talented players in that draft. So they are going to get a chance to fail maybe once, twice, 3 times more than their counterpart who was taken in the 20th round or was signed as a non-drafted free agent, just because there's a perception that if we can unlock their abilities, they will have the chance to impact at the big league level well beyond their counterparts. And so I do think that's real. I'm not going to hide from that. I think those kids are getting more consideration than others. But I've also seen it from the perspective you just shared, where there is a sense at which, like, we have to own the mistakes we made, that, hey, maybe we didn't evaluate his talent, or maybe the work ethic is a little bit misaligned, or maybe he's just too prone to injury. And after a few injuries, he's become something less than what we thought we drafted. Then compounding the problem, I think, is continuing to ask the player to deliver at a level which he's demonstrated he can't. Let's just allow that guy to slide into a role of being the best version of himself. And maybe we thought he was going to be a top of the rotation starter, but it's okay if he's a middle reliever when he gets to the big leagues. That's still a success at some level. If we hold him to the standard of living up to his draft status, we may never allow him to be the best version of himself. So I think that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is, once you draft a player and he gets into the game, like, he's got to hold his own. Like, you at some point, it is a meritocracy. Yes, they're going to get extra consideration, but the game sorts that out very quickly.
I imagine, as the general manager, you want to know when this guy fails, what he's made of, right? And I think about a guy who's a top prospect in the minor leagues, gets drafted, never really failed in amateur baseball, first round pick, works through the minor leagues, still hasn't really dealt with any failure. And there are plenty of guys in the big leagues right now. They don't get failure. They don't experience it until they get to the big leagues. As a general manager, are you almost hoping that guy does face a level of failure in the minor leagues so that he can learn how to get out of it? Because on some level, like, the sophomore slump we oftentimes talk about, a kid who gets called up to the big leagues, rookie year is amazing. And then sure enough, the opposing pitchers maybe get a book on the kid, and now they're going to pick apart his weaknesses, and now he can't make an adjustment. And now he's got to deal with the mindset of like, wait a second, what is going on? I'm getting exposed, and now I lack confidence.
100%. I mean, we are seeking those opportunities in the minor leagues constantly, because you're not judged by the adversity you face. It's how you face the adversity that you experienced. And so we want to know how you counterpunch. Like, everybody in the game gets knocked on their caboose at a time. So like, how do you bounce up? Because with all the data right now, there's just a very short window of time that you come up to the big leagues and people don't know your strengths and weaknesses. They immediately adjust. So that the game is constantly about adjustments. Are you able to stay one step ahead of them adjusting to you? The more talented you are, the more cushion you have there. But for the average major league player who's still an exceptional player,
Yeah.
it's a constant game of punching and counter punching. So we want to know exactly how you handle that in the minor leagues, because once you get to the big leagues and that happens, and we've seen it so many times, and I could think of a number of players too, and you've been gracious enough not to name names, and I'm not going to do it here. But they get to the big leagues, they kind of coasted through the minor leagues. They hit at every level. They get to the big leagues and they have a 6-week period where the league doesn't know them. They do very well. And then all of a sudden they get knocked on their butt. And it sometimes takes a full season for them to recover from that. We'd rather have them have that experience in a safer environment where there's less at stake, where their margin of error is greater, and we can give them a longer kind of leash to work their way through that. At the big league level, when the guy gets knocked on his butt and has a tough time getting back up, there's only so long we can help them sort through that before we have to take them out of the major league environment. And now all of a sudden they're not getting the full value of learning from that experience.
I mean, if you look at my belief anyways, the role of an agent, right? We wear many hats. One of them is like, we need to like guide you through your career. Part of that is really understanding kind of what's like the next thing for you, right? What's on deck for you. When a player's in the minor leagues, one of the things that agents oftentimes are met with is, let's just say a player who's in an organization, and let's just say he's a catcher, and the big league catcher is a guy that's on a multi-year contract. And that player is just, he's in AAA, he's a top prospect now, and he's like, I'm never getting called up. This is brutal. One of the things that I did when I had guys go through this is I put together what I call kind of like a blocked study, right? I listed out, there was like 5 players, and across the board, everybody would say, this player, this prospect, he's blocked, right? And a guy that came to mind from this study was Gary Sanchez. When Gary Sanchez was a top prospect in the minor leagues with the Yankees, he goes out there and has a pretty good year, I think at AA, ends up going to AAA the next season. And the Yankees that offseason end up signing Brian McCann to, I think it was like a 5-year deal. He's now their catcher. And if you're Gary Sanchez, you're thinking, well, I'm getting traded. Like, there's no world in which I'm staying with the Yankees, right? And so as a player, it's very easy to throw your hands up and be like, this sucks. Like, now my career is getting ruined because they did this. What does this say about me? What does it say about the organization, how they think of me, et cetera? But the message I always share with players is the number one thing that you cannot lose sight of. It is always about your performance. You have to continue to play, because if you don't put up numbers, then you're giving them every reason to say, well, maybe you're not ready. But if you keep playing and if you keep forcing the issue, someone's either going to come trade for you, or there's going to be a need in the big leagues and you're going to be the guy that gets called up.
I think that's the perfect positioning. This is the quintessential argument around control what you can control. And what you can control is showcasing the best version of yourself each night. And you ideally are doing that for your own organization and inspiring them to call you up because they just have to. You're performing so well, they have to create a spot for you. Or as you say, maybe the spot is created by an injury or a poor performance at the big league level. But in addition to that, you're also showcasing your talent for the other 29 clubs. And there are people watching. And if you're performing at an elite level, people are going to come get you. People don't recognize major league talent in the minor leagues and turn a blind eye to that. There are really a finite number of guys who should absolutely be in the big leagues today or playing in the minor leagues. There are very few professions out there where one day you could be living in one city, the next day you could be reporting to the other. But if you can keep your head straight on controlling what you can control, focus on the day at hand and being the best version of yourself, it's very rare for a guy who's unequivocally a major league talent to be waylaid in the minor leagues for too long. That will remedy itself, and it will remedy itself soon if you continue to avail yourself as a guy who could help a major league team win a baseball game that night.
So if you were to see an organization like the Yankees in that case who signed Brian McCann, are you like, does that tip you off at all to say, oh, I wonder if they'll move Gary Sanchez? And you'll like reach out to them? Is that fair to assume?
Yeah, so I think 2 things, and maybe these aren't fair, but these are things that you assume in those cases is, okay, maybe they have some questions about Gary Sanchez's ability to be the full-time catcher. So that's one thing. And 2 is, if we don't have those concerns, we are 100% calling because he's now blocked, and there's a chance that they will now trade him There's no such thing as having too much major league capable catching. So it's not like they have to trade him in that scenario. But I'll share an experience where I made a mistake in this regard. One of my first years working in Texas, general manager is John Daniels. He's, you know, exceptional friend and a tremendous leader.
Yeah, JD's the man.
JD is the man. And we had one of these scenarios, Matt. So we had at the major league level, Mark Teixeira was our first baseman. At AAA, we had Adrian Gonzalez, who was our first baseman. Kevin Towers, a wily veteran GM, wonderful human being, called us up and said, "Hey, would you consider trading Adrian Gonzalez?" We were short-sighted enough to say, "Well, yeah, I mean, he's blocked. Like we're not going to." We didn't have the vision to understand that those two guys could coexist on the same major league team, absent of being one of them being a DH, which we thought would devalue one of the two guys. So we end up making a trade with San Diego in which Kevin definitely swindled us. So that is a case in point where I think the team that has Gary Sanchez in that case has to be very thoughtful. We can't allow the industry to devalue a player just because he's not our first string guy. But also we have to recognize the value that that player possesses, especially at a premium position like catching. You know, Gary Sanchez in that moment in time could have been traded for a ton, but don't lose sight of the fact that that player has a ton of value. Be patient in assessing it, be open-minded to trading him, but don't allow the industry to devalue him just because he's not your featured player at that position, because you're so blessed in that moment in time to have a player who's equally as good, if not better, at the major league level.
Yeah, I think players oftentimes don't see it the way that I think agents and people that are on the business side a little bit more see it, which is, yeah, I mean, if you're getting a phone call from another GM, a player would say, "Oh, well, you guys are on the same side. So you guys you'll call up a GM and be like, 'Hey, man, you want to take this guy off my hands? Yeah, what do you want? Here you go.'" And it's like, it's done. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not how it goes, right? Like you guys are feeling each other out. You're not just trying to give away the farm, right, for nothing. So on some level, yeah, it's a negotiation, no different than a player's negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we're all trying to buy low and sell high. But if both sides are trying to do the same thing, that makes for a very difficult negotiation. So, you know, there's very different schools of negotiation at the major league level. You know, the one I always used to employ was I always wanted to start from a place of fair. So if my first offer you accepted, you could hold your head high, like, we got a fair deal done. Now, admittedly, I'm looking for the best version of fair for us, but it's also fair for you. There are other people who subscribe to the theory of, well, it didn't hurt to ask you. You know, and usually those deals are deals that would be extremely one-sided. And I always remind them, it does hurt to ask because your integrity is on the line. But I may be wary of doing business with that team. And if there's any chance to work with somebody else, I'll choose that over going back to having a conversation with somebody who kind of mishandled the situation to that extent and showed a lack of integrity by asking for a deal that would have been totally lopsided. Or when I was a little bit compromised, really put their foot on my throat and really I struggled to breathe rather than helping me up and getting me back in the game and understanding, okay, there's a scenario where they could win this deal, but they don't have to vanquish me in the process.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've all seen deals that have worked out for one side and not the other. And I think people would assume the general manager who won the deal is celebrating, saying, "Oh, I'm so brilliant. This is amazing." But at the end of the day, I have to imagine, Thad, you're like, "No, that bums me out because that guy's going to get criticized. He's going to lose his job." And in reality, when we made the trade, I didn't know this guy was going to fall on his face. I actually thought he was going to be okay.
Right. The goal of every negotiation is to facilitate the next negotiation. So I want the player that I send to you to actually do well. That's the best case scenario, because then when you want to make the next deal, you're being inclined to like try to call me because you think that that's a great place for you to get good players. The worst case scenario is when I go into my owner and say, "Hey, based upon how we've conducted ourselves, whether it's an integrity standpoint or whether it's we just, you know, tried to vanquish the foe a few times, I can only really negotiate with 18 teams now." I think that's when an owner should say to you, like, "Hey, then we got to get somebody else in this role because I need to know that you have the full access to the talent pool in the game." And it's the same with agents. Like, I think there's a misconception based upon movies that agents and front office executives have these big contentious knockdown, drag out fights. And, you know, we're using 4-letter words when we talk to each other. The reality is like, we actually are on the same end of the rope for the most part. Like, there's nothing better than me paying your player a ton of money because that means he performed extremely well for our team. Like, that's an extremely good outcome. Front office relationships I've had is, okay, we get the negotiation out of the way. Now let's put our heads together. Like, how do we get the most out of the player? Like, what are you seeing? What are we seeing? Because there's off-season programming that agents are much more involved in than the front office executives are. Like, how do we holistically support this player to be the best version of himself? It's not that you guys are trying to do something and we're doing something totally different, which may at times be at odds with each other. The goal is to do something together so that when we negotiate the next time, your player's in a position to dominate us and make the most money possible, because that means he contributed exceptionally well to the team.
That great answer. It's funny. I was actually going to ask you about your answer to that, which was about agents. So you answered it. I got a last little quick rapid fire. So just give me first thing that comes to mind. Just a couple questions. The favorite player that you had that you really looked forward to having in your clubhouse?
The first name that comes to mind is Adrian Beltre. I mean, he's super talented, first ballot Hall of Famer. But in addition to that, I've never seen somebody carry himself enjoying the game of baseball more on a night in and night out basis. I mean, he was there to entertain fans, and it was part because it came so naturally to him. He just wore his emotions on his sleeve. To marry that up with the talent and the extraordinary things he could do made him one of the most enjoyable players to watch night in and night out.
Yeah, he was fun to watch, especially when all the guys would mess with him, like touch his head. What's one thing fans completely misunderstand about how trades actually happen?
I think it's getting back to what we talked about, where it's like this kind of knockdown, contentious thing where we're all trying to win every trade. I think the best trades I've ever been involved in involved the other team being able to hold their head high too. So I think the thing that fans may not realize is I'm actually hunting opportunities to deliver the most value to you that matters the least to me, if that makes sense. Most deals that I've ever done at some point come to the point where the other side says, well, there's nothing more that we can talk about. So there's points at which you have to negotiate both sides of the deal to get them back into the conversation. And the only way you can do that is if you take their interest to heart and actually try to deliver value to them. So that's part of the negotiation that I've experienced in most significant deals I've done. It's the attention to delivering value to the other side, as well as getting the best end of the deal for your team.
I love that. If you could sit in on any negotiation in MLB history, past or present, which one would it be?
The one that has drawn the most eyebrow raises in the last couple of years, and I would have loved to have been part of, is the Shohei Ohtani negotiation. I mean, just what a fascinating $700 million deal, $600 million deferred. They also know how much revenue they're getting through all these sponsorship dollars. Shohei is willing to put some money off to the side, probably with the understanding that they're going to do some other aggressive things for the team. There had to have been a collaboration at a level that we just normally do not see in that type of negotiation. I assume the agent, the player, the front office, the ownership was all involved. And I would just love to have been a fly in the wall to see the back and forth in that negotiation.
I will say this, having been a part of not that one, but big negotiations in the past, when you get those deals done with the organization, there's a nice moment after where you're all celebrating, and it's a great feeling. It's truly it's what we're all here for, right? To feel those moments. Well, Thad, I appreciate you, brother. This has been fantastic. Again, I want to give the name of your podcast so everybody could go check it out. It's called Rosters to Rings. I'm assuming they can get it on just anywhere that podcasts are shown, Apple, Spotify.
Exactly. Apple, Spotify, Google, all the good stuff. And the origin of the name is we cover you from opening day rosters in every sport to championship rings won and everything in between. So yeah, definitely check it out. We'd love to get your feedback. Any questions you guys may have, we'll address on the air.
I love it. Brother, I appreciate you. I'll give you a holler.
Thanks, Matt. Great spending time with you.